Welcome back and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the study windows of the Knox family estate, where Remington Knox stood surrounded by 3 generations of family history. His fingers traced the spine of another leather-bound journal as he searched for the elusive tax documents he needed. The colonial house's weathered oak shelves held more than just books. They contained the legacy of the Knox men who had raised their families within these walls. Rem paused at his great-grandfather's section, noting how the leather bindings had darkened with age. As he pulled one volume forward, something shifted behind it, a manila envelope, wedged deep between the books. It was thick, obviously full of documents, and bore no markings on its exterior. "That's odd," he muttered, carefully extracting it. The envelope wasn't sealed, and its contents slid out easily into his hands. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the first page, then widened in disbelief. Adoption papers. Multiple sets, professionally drafted and ready for signatures. Rem's heart skipped a beat. He and Evangeline had never discussed adoption, not once in their decade of marriage. Their twins, Aurora and Sebastian, were weeks away from their 8th birthday. The thought that she might want to expand their family should have brought joy, but something felt off about these papers. He moved to his grandfather's mahogany desk, spreading the documents across its polished surface. The formatting looked strange for adoption papers, too many clauses about custody and legal guardianship. Before he could read further, voices drifted up through the heating vent from the kitchen below. "I'm telling you, Mom, everything's under control." Evangeline's voice carried clearly through the old ductwork. "Rem will sign them without a second thought. He's so trusting, he won't even read past the first page." Rem froze, his hand hovering over the papers. A muffled response from his mother-in-law was followed by Evangeline's laugh, a sound that now seemed hollow, stripped of its usual warmth. "Of course Declan and I have thought this through. Once Rem signs, the kids will legally be with their real father. My darling brother-in-law has waited long enough, don't you think?" The words hit Rem like physical blows. His fingers clenched, crumpling the edge of the document he held. The implications of what he just heard threatened to overwhelm him, but years of corporate negotiations had taught him to control his reactions. He forced his breathing to steady, his mind already shifting into analytical mode. Looking down at the papers with new understanding, he noticed details he'd missed in his initial shock. The careful wording about transfer of parental rights. The specific mentions of medical and educational decision-making authority. These weren't adoption papers, they were a trap, designed to strip him of his rights to his own children. And what about the foundation board meeting next month? His mother-in-law's voice became clearer as she moved closer to the vent. "Please, Mother. Once this is done, the Knox family trust will be secure. Declan has everything planned. Rem won't know what hit him until it's too late." The sound of a cabinet door closing downstairs snapped Rem out of his focused listening. He gathered the papers with mechanical precision, returned them exactly as he'd found them, and carefully shifted the journals back into place. Years of boardroom battles had taught him the value of appearing unchanged when you discovered your opponent's hand. He glanced at his reflection in the window. Not a hair out of place. Not a sign of the earthquake that had just shaken his world. Good. He needed that control now more than ever. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from Aurora's teacher about the upcoming school play. His children. His twins. A wave of cold fury washed over him, but he channeled it into clarity. They needed him thinking, not reacting. The study door opened, and Evangeline appeared, wearing the smile that had once made his heart race. Now he saw the calculation behind it. "Darling, did you find those tax documents?" She leaned against the doorframe, the picture of casual concern. "You've been up here for ages." Rem allowed himself a small frown of frustration. "Not yet. This filing system of Dad's is like a puzzle box. Why don't you take a break? The kids want to show you their new science project before dinner." "Good idea." He moved toward the door, noting how she stepped aside just enough to let him pass without touching her. Had she always done that? What are they working on now? "Something about family genetics," she said, following him down the hall. They're fascinated by inherited traits. The irony might have broken him if he hadn't already shifted into battle mode. Instead, he merely nodded. Sounds interesting. Lead the way. As they descended the stairs, Rim's mind was already mapping out his next moves. He'd learned long ago that in business, the person who struck first usually lost. Information was power, and he needed more of it. He watched Evangeline walk ahead of him, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floors. She'd always moved like a queen in their home, but now he saw it differently, not regal, but entitled. She thought she was sacrificing a pawn in her game. She had no idea she'd just awakened a knight. After dinner, when Evangeline took the twins to their piano lessons, Rim returned to the study. The manila envelope remained exactly where he'd left it, but this time he bypassed it entirely. His target was the journal he'd been examining when he'd first made his discovery. His great-grandfather's handwriting filled the pages with tales of business dealings and family matters, but Rim wasn't interested in the distant past. He pulled out volume after volume until he reached the most recent ones, the journals his father had maintained until his death 5 years ago. The last journal felt different. Rim ran his fingers along its spine, finding a slight bulge near the binding. Careful examination revealed a letter tucked deep inside, the paper yellowed with age. His father's distinctive handwriting covered the page. "Son, there's something you need to know about Evangeline and Declan. I've been gathering evidence. If anything happens to me..." The rest was torn away, the paper jagged where it had been ripped mid-sentence. Rim stared at the fragment, memories of his father's death flooding back. The car accident had never made sense. His father had been an exceptionally careful driver, especially in rain. The investigation had been surprisingly brief, the case closed despite several unanswered questions. Mr. Knox? Maria, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Declan is here to see you." Rim quickly secured the letter in his inner jacket pocket. "Thank you, Maria. I'll meet him in the living room." Declan Knox strode into the room like he owned it, which Rim now realized might have been the plan all along. His brother's tailored suit and confident smile had once seemed charming. Now they struck Rim as the costume of a con man. "Working late, brother?" Declan's tone was casual, but his eyes darted around the study. "Just organizing some old files." Rim gestured to the scattered papers on his desk. "What brings you by? Can't a man visit his favorite brother?" Declan dropped into a leather armchair. "Actually, I wanted to discuss the Foundation's new tech initiative. I've got some promising startups lined up." "I'm sure you do." Rim leaned back, studying the man he'd grown up with. Had there always been that predatory edge to his smile? "But it's late, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. Why don't we discuss it at the office?" A flicker of something annoyance? Concern? Crossed Declan's face. "This is rather time-sensitive, Remington. These opportunities won't wait forever. Neither will my meeting." Rim stood, a clear dismissal. "We'll talk tomorrow." After showing Declan out, Rim returned to the study and locked the door. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Sterling Bishop." "Sterling, it's Rem Knox. Remember that favor you owe me from our Harvard days?" A chuckle came through the speaker. "The one where you kept me from getting expelled? Hard to forget. I need your help." Quietly, Rem's voice was low, even though he knew Evangeline was still out with the twins. "How much access does your position at the FBI give you to financial records?" "Enough to be dangerous." "What are we looking for?" "Everything you can find on my brother's tech startups. Shell companies, offshore accounts, anything suspicious." "And Sterling? Include my wife in that search." A pause. "Rem, are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." After hanging up, Rem sat at his desk and opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he composed a carefully worded email to the twins' doctor, requesting their complete medical records, including all tests from birth. The response came faster than he expected. Dr. Carter's reply was brief, but the attachment made Rem's blood run cold. It was a DNA test from the twins' birth, one he'd never seen before, one that had been deliberately kept from him. A knock at the door made him close the laptop quickly. "Yes? Daddy?" Aurora's voice came through the wood. "Can you help me with my science homework?" Rem took a deep breath, forcing his features into a calm expression before opening the door. His daughter stood there, notebook in hand, her dark curls falling around her face just like his mother's had. Of course, sweetheart. He lifted her onto his lap as he sat back at the desk, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. What are we studying? As Aurora chatted about genetic traits and Punnett squares, Rem held her a little tighter than usual. Looking at her now, he could see pieces of himself in every feature: his mother's curls, his father's eye shape, the Knox family chin. Daddy? Are you okay? You're squishing me. Sorry, princess. He loosened his grip slightly. Just thinking about how much you remind me of Grandma Cordelia. Mommy says I look more like Aunt Patricia. Mommy's wrong about a lot of things, Rem muttered, then caught himself. Now, about those Punnett squares. The next morning, Rem arrived at his office earlier than usual. He needed time to think, to plan, to begin gathering the threads that would unravel this conspiracy. The city spread out below his corner office, the same view he'd had for the past decade. But today, everything looked different. His assistant, Janet, knocked and entered with his usual coffee. Mr. Knox? Mr. Bishop is on line 1. He says it's urgent. Thank you, Janet. Hold all other calls. Rem waited until the door closed before picking up the phone. What did you find? Sterling's voice was grim. You might want to sit down for this, Remington. Those shell companies your brother uses for his tech startups? They all trace back to accounts opened the month before your wedding. And Evangeline's signature is on every single one. Rem's grip tightened on the phone. How many? 7 companies, 3 offshore accounts. The paper trail is complicated, but it's there if you know where to look. Rem, there's more. The initial funding for these accounts came from a transfer the day after your father's funeral. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that made Rem's stomach turn. Can you send me everything you've found? Already encrypted and on its way. But Rem, be careful. This level of financial manipulation. These people aren't playing around. As if on cue, Rem's laptop chimed with a new email. Not Sterling's report. This was from Dr. Carter, responding to his request for the twins' complete medical records. The attached files included birth certificates he'd never seen before, listing an attending physician he didn't recognize. Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, he read aloud. What was that? Sterling asked. The attending physician on my children's birth certificates. Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood. Does that name appear anywhere in your financial investigation? The sound of rapid typing came through the phone. Give me a minute. Well, one of those offshore accounts? Registered to A.T. Blackwood. Can you find out who this doctor is? Already on it. More typing. Rem, there's no record of a Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood ever working at the hospital where your kids were born. But I'm finding something else. Hold on. Rem's office door opened, and Evangeline walked in, immaculate in a designer suit. Darling, we need to talk about those papers I left in your study. I'll call you back, Rem said into the phone, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. He looked up at his wife, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. What papers would those be, dear? Evangeline's smile was practiced, perfect. The adoption papers, silly. I know we haven't discussed it, but I really think expanding our family would be wonderful. The twins are at such a good age for a new sibling. Rem leaned back in his chair, allowing himself to appear thoughtful. Interesting timing. I was just reviewing some old family documents myself. Oh. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Yes. It's amazing what you can find in old journals. Letters. Birth certificates. He watched her face carefully. Tell me, Evangeline, who is Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood? The color drained from her face for just a moment before she recovered. I don't recall the names of all the doctors from 8 years ago, darling. Why do you ask? No reason. Rem smiled, the same smile he used when closing a hostile takeover. About those papers, why don't you bring them to my office later? We can go through them together. Actually, there's no rush. Evangeline backed toward the door. We should discuss it at home, when we have more time. After she left, Rem picked up his phone again. Sterling? Find everything you can on Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood. And Sterling? Add my father's accident to your investigation. I have a feeling it wasn't an accident at all. He turned to his computer, pulling up the files Sterling had sent. As he read through the evidence of years of manipulation and deceit, his resolve hardened. They had underestimated him, mistaking his trust for weakness. That was their first mistake. It would also be their last. The grandfather clock in the Knox mansion struck midnight as Rem sat in his study, reviewing Sterling's preliminary findings. The documents painted a disturbing pattern of financial manipulation, but pieces were still missing. His phone lit up with an incoming call. Cordelia Knox. His mother rarely called this late. Mother? Son. Cordelia's voice trembled, unlike her usual composed manner. I need to tell you something. It can't wait until morning. Rem switched on the recording function of his phone, a habit from years of business dealings that now served a darker purpose. What's wrong? It's about Declan. She drew a shaky breath. He came to see me today. He was drunk, angry. He started talking about things that have been happening since your wedding day. But it goes back further than that, all the way to college. Rem's grip tightened on the phone. Tell me everything. I found letters in the attic last week, while looking for your father's old files. Letters between Declan and Evangeline, dated before your engagement. They've been planning this for years, Remington. The marriage, the children. All of it. What do you mean, planning? Your father suspected something wasn't right. That's why he was investigating that night, the night of the accident. Cordelia's voice cracked. He called me just before he left, said he had proof of something involving Declan and the company finances. He never made it home. The implications settled like ice in Rem's veins. Did Declan say anything about that night? Not directly, but he made threats when I confronted him about the letters. Said accidents happen in families all the time. Said I should remember what happened to your father before asking too many questions. A pause. Rem, there's more. Check the twins' birth certificates. Look at the attending physician, Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, Rem said. The name already burned into his memory. How did you? I've been doing some investigating of my own. Mother, I need those letters. They're gone. Declan took them. But I remember what they said, every word. They talked about the Knox Trust, about needing legitimate heirs, about how easy it would be to manipulate you because you'd never suspect your own brother. Rem's jaw clenched. What exactly did they want from the trust? Everything. The foundation, the company holdings, the family estate. But they needed a Knox heir to access it. That's why they chose you. Declan couldn't qualify on his own after that scandal in college. What scandal? The one your father hushed up. Declan was selling company secrets to competitors. Your father gave him a choice, resign from the company or face charges. That's when the plotting started. They needed you, your position, your children. A door slammed somewhere in the house, and Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone's here. I have to go. But Rem, be careful. They're desperate now, and desperate people do dangerous things, Rem finished. Mother, stay somewhere else tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even Patricia. After hanging up, Rem sat in the darkness of his study, pieces falling into place. His father's death, the suspicious timing of his engagement, the way Evangeline had rushed their wedding. His phone buzzed with a text from Sterling. Found something big about Blackwood. Call SAP. Sterling's office at the FBI Forensic Accounting Division hummed with the sound of computers. Maps of financial transactions covered one wall, red strings connecting shell companies to offshore accounts. Rem stood before them, studying the complex web his brother had woven. Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, Sterling said, pulling up a file on his screen, licensed to practice medicine in 3 states until 1995, when his license was revoked for falsifying medical records. Want to guess his real name? Rem leaned closer to the monitor. Show me. Dr. Theodore Blake, Evangeline's father. He changed his name after the medical board investigation, started practicing under Blackwood. But here's where it gets interesting. Sterling pointed to a series of transactions. That offshore account funding Declan's startups? Registered to T. Blackwood. The same signature appears on both the medical license application and the bank documents. He's been helping them all along, Rem muttered. But why risk practicing medicine under a false name? Because they needed someone they could trust to falsify the birth records. Sterling pulled up another document. I had our forensics team analyze the twins' original birth certificates. The paper's authentic, but the information isn't. These were created using stolen hospital letterhead and credentials. Rim's phone buzzed. A text from Evangeline. Where are you? We need to discuss those papers. Ignore it, Sterling advised, noting Rim's expression. We're close to something big here. Look at this pattern of transfers from Blackwood's account to a series of holding companies. Each one corresponds to a major event in your life. Your engagement, wedding, the twins' birth. They were marking their progress, Rim realized. Each step of their plan. Exactly. And there's more. Remember that medical board investigation that cost him his license? It wasn't just about falsified records. He was performing unauthorized fertility treatments, manipulating genetic testing results. A knock at the office door interrupted them. Sterling's assistant entered with a stack of files. The hospital employment records you requested, sir. And Mr. Knox, your brother's secretary, called. He's trying to reach you about an urgent foundation matter. Tell him I'm in meetings all day. Rim turned back to the records. What else did you find about these fertility treatments? Sterling spread the files across his desk. According to the medical board investigation, Blackwood was accused of tampering with paternity tests, falsifying birth records, even performing unauthorized procedures. He lost his license, but most of the records were sealed as part of a settlement. Can you unseal them? Already working on it. But Rim, there's something else you should see. Sterling pulled up a security camera photo. This was taken at your father's accident site 2 hours before the crash. Recognize anyone? The grainy image showed two figures in the rain, one unmistakably Declan, the other a woman whose stance and build matched Evangeline's exactly. They were there, Rim said quietly. They killed him. We can't prove that yet. But combined with the financial evidence, Sterling gestured at the wall of connections. We're building a RICO case. Fraud, conspiracy, maybe even murder. But we need more time to make it airtight. Time is the one thing we don't have. Rim showed Sterling the adoption papers he'd photographed. They're making their move now. Back in his office, Rim spread the evidence across his desk like pieces of a dark puzzle. The timeline was becoming clear. Evangeline and Declan's relationship predated his marriage, possibly starting during that college scandal his mother had mentioned. The startups, the falsified records, his own position at the company, all carefully orchestrated pieces of their long game. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Knox? Your wife is here to see you. Send her in. Rim quickly tucked the documents into his safe, leaving only innocent paperwork visible. Evangeline entered, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Darling, you've been avoiding me. We need to discuss those papers. Which ones? Rim kept his tone casual. The adoption papers you left in the study, or the shell company documents you signed before our wedding? She faltered for just a moment before recovering her smile. I don't know what you're talking about. The adoption papers are exactly what they appear to be. I thought expanding our family would make you happy. Like you made my father happy? The words were soft, but they hit their mark. Evangeline's smile flickered. Your father's accident was tragic, but I don't see what that has to do with. Interesting choice of words. I don't recall mentioning an accident. Rim stood, moving around the desk. Tell me, how long have you and Declan been planning this? Since college? Or did it start when my father caught him selling company secrets? The mask cracked further. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? The shell companies, the false medical records, the convenient timing of my father's death. It all fits a pattern. The only thing I can't figure out is why you went through with the marriage at all. Why not just let Declan take over when father died? Understanding dawned in her eyes. You know about the trust. The Knox family trust, accessible only to blood relatives with legitimate heirs. That's why you needed me, isn't it? Declan was disqualified after his scandal, but a marriage to me, children with my name. You have no proof of anything. Her voice had lost its warmth, revealing the steel beneath. And even if you did, who would believe you? The trustworthy brother versus the charming family man? Please. Rim smiled, the same smile he used before destroying a business rival. You really think I've survived this long in corporate takeovers by being trustworthy? Every conversation we've had for the past week has been recorded. Every document you've touched has been copied. Even this conversation is being preserved for future use. For the first time, he saw real fear in her eyes. You wouldn't dare expose this. Think of the children. My children, he corrected her. Or should we discuss Dr. Blackwood's involvement in their birth records? Evangeline's composure shattered completely. If you think you can threaten me. Threaten you? No, dear wife. I'm going to destroy you. You, Declan, your father, everyone involved in this conspiracy. But not yet. For now, go home. Play with our children. Enjoy the mansion. Consider it a preview of everything you're about to lose. After she fled his office, Rim called Sterling. How soon can you have that RICO case ready? Give me 2 weeks. Make it 1. They're getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Rem looked out his office window at the city below. It's time to set the final trap. The Knox Foundation Gala was in 10 days. The perfect stage for his counterattack. Let them think they had him cornered. Let them play their hand. He'd learned from his father's mistake. The best way to catch a snake was to make it think it was winning, right until the moment the trap snapped shut. The Knox estate gleamed under the evening lights, its colonial architecture providing the perfect backdrop for the annual Foundation Gala. Over 300 of the city's most influential figures moved through the grand halls, their conversations a steady murmur beneath crystal chandeliers. In his study, Rim adjusted his bow tie, watching the security feeds on his laptop. Sterling's team had installed additional cameras that morning, ensuring every angle would be captured. Everything's in place, Sterling confirmed through the secure line. Teams are positioned around the perimeter. Evidence packets are ready for distribution. Are you sure you want to do it this way? A snake only shows its true nature when it thinks it's won. Rim closed the laptop. They've spent years building their performance. It's time for the final act. Downstairs, Evangeline held court in the main hall, resplendent in designer silk that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She played the perfect hostess, laughing at all the right moments, touching all the right arms. Only someone who knew what to look for would notice how her eyes kept darting to the study door, waiting for Rim to appear. Declan stood at the podium, rehearsing his keynote speech. The Golden Knox Foundation banner hung behind him, its motto etched in silver, legacy through honor. The irony wasn't lost on Rim. Daddy! Aurora's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway of his study, Sebastian beside her, both dressed for the gala. Mom says you need to come down. Uncle Declan's about to start his speech. Rim knelt before his children, straightening Sebastian's tie. I'll be there soon. Remember what we practiced? The twins nodded solemnly. They'd taken the news about their mother better than expected, perhaps because they'd sensed something was wrong long before Rim had discovered the truth. Children often saw what adults missed. Good. He hugged them both. Now go find Grandma Cordelia. Stay with her until I call you up. As they left, Rim took one final look at his father's portrait on the wall. Time to finish what you started, Dad. The main hall buzzed with anticipation as Rim descended the grand staircase. Board members, business associates, family friends, all gathered to celebrate the Knox legacy. None of them knew they were about to witness its greatest test. Evangeline intercepted him at the bottom of the stairs, her smile brittle. Where have you been? Declan's about to announce the new tech initiative. The one we discussed. The Shell Company initiative, you mean? Rim kept his voice low, watching her face. Or should we call it the trust fund acquisition plan? Her smile didn't waver, but her fingers tightened on his arm. Don't make a scene, darling. Think of the children. I always do. He removed her hand. That's why I've spent the last month thinking about how to protect them from you. Before she could respond, Declan tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. The crowd turned toward the podium. Declan cut an impressive figure, every inch the successful businessman. His confidence had always been his greatest weapon and his greatest weakness. The Knox Foundation stands for legacy, Declan began, his voice carrying across the hushed room. For 3 generations, we've built more than just wealth. We've built a dynasty. Today, I'm honored to announce our boldest initiative yet. Rem moved through the crowd, positioning himself near the stage. He could see Sterling's agents at their assigned positions, watches synchronized, evidence packets ready. But before my brother shares his vision, Declan continued, I'd like to say a few words about family, about trust, about the bonds that make us stronger than any individual ambition. Rem caught his mother's eye across the room. Cordelia stood with the twins, her face set in the same expression she'd worn at his father's funeral. She gave him a slight nod. And now, Declan raised his glass, I'd like to introduce the man who's been not just my brother, but my partner in preserving the Knox legacy, Remington Knox. The applause echoed off marble floors as Rem took the podium. Evangeline's smile faltered as she noticed the screens behind him flickering to life. Today we're discussing legacy, Rem began, his voice carrying the same authority that had destroyed countless boardroom opponents. So let's talk about how my wife and brother stole mine. The silence that fell was absolute. 5 years ago, Rem continued, as images appeared on the screens behind him, my father died in what appeared to be a tragic accident. Tonight, we're going to talk about why it wasn't an accident at all. Security footage filled the screens, grainy but clear enough to show 2 figures in the rain, examining the brake lines of a car. Gasps rippled through the crowd as timestamps appeared, matching the night of the accident. But that's just the beginning. Rem clicked through financial records, bank statements, falsified documents. Let's discuss the shell companies opened the month before my wedding. The offshore accounts registered to a doctor who doesn't exist. The systematic theft of millions from this foundation. Declan stepped forward, his charm cranked to maximum. Brother, if you have concerns about the foundation's finances, we should discuss this privately. Like you discuss things privately with my wife? Rem's voice could have frozen hell. Or like you discuss things with my father before he died. More images appeared, letters, emails, bank transfers. The evidence unfurled like a poisonous flower, each petal more damning than the last. DNA tests. Click. Bank records. Click. My father's partial letter, now completed by documents found in my mother's attic. Evangeline started moving toward the exit, but Sterling's agents smoothly blocked her path. Dr. Theodore Blake, Rem announced, also known as Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, my wife's father. A man who lost his medical license for falsifying records, who then created a new identity to continue his fraud. The man who helped orchestrate this entire scheme. The screens showed medical board investigations, license revocations, evidence of continued practice under false credentials. A planned seduction. Click. An engineered marriage. Click. Falsified birth records. Click. All leading to one goal, the Knox family trust. Declan reached the podium, his mask finally cracking. These are baseless accusations. But you made one mistake. Rem cut him off. You thought the Knox trust was about blood. It's not. It's about honor. New footage appeared on the screens. Declan and Evangeline, the night of the accident. Phone records. Bank transfers. The sabotaged brake lines. 5 years of investigation. Rem continued. Every conversation recorded. Every document preserved. Every move you made, documented and verified. The crowd had drawn back, creating an island around Evangeline and Declan. The perfect stage for their final performance. Federal agents emerged from the crowd, led by Sterling himself. Declan Knox, Evangeline Knox, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and suspicion of murder. The foundation's board members huddled in a corner, already voting to freeze all assets pending investigation. Rem wasn't finished. But this isn't just about justice. He nodded to the tech team, and new images appeared. The twin school play from the previous week. Watch your children perform, he told Evangeline and Declan. It's the last time you'll see them. Evangeline's composure finally shattered. What are you talking about? The custody papers you plan to trick me into signing? Rem's smile was razor-sharp. I had my lawyers convert them to termination of parental rights, for both of you. Fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment. No judge in the country will grant you visitation. Those are my children. Evangeline lunged for the podium, her designer dress forgotten as security restrained her. No, Rim's voice cut like steel through her screams. They're mine. The DNA test you faked? I had it redone. Turns out your father's medical fraud extended to fertility treatments. The twins are mine, biologically and in every way that matters. The evidence continued to play behind him, years of conspiracy exposed in high-definition clarity. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Evangeline and Declan were led away in handcuffs, their masks finally, completely shattered. Hours later, after the last guest had left and the federal agents had finished collecting evidence, Rim stood in his study. The twins slept upstairs, safe under their grandmother's watch. The estate was quiet, cleansed of its poisonous secrets. He opened his safe, removing one final document, a letter found in the wreckage of his father's car, warning about the snakes in their garden. Justice, like truth, sometimes skipped a generation, but it never slept. Sterling appeared in the doorway. The RICO case is solid. They're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. The foundation board has already voted to remove them from all positions and freeze their assets. And Dr. Blake? Picked up at his beach house an hour ago. He's singing like a canary, trying to cut a deal. Rem nodded, placing the letter back in the safe. Have your team sweep the house again. I want every trace of them gone before the twins wake up. Already done. Sterling hesitated. You know, most men would have handled this differently. More publicly, more emotionally. Most men never had to watch their father die for trying to expose the truth. Rem closed the safe. Most men never had to protect their children from their own mother's schemes. The mansion would need changes, new security, new staff, new protocols. But the Knox legacy would survive, stronger for having exposed its weakest links. The snakes were gone from the garden, their poison neutralized by the very trust they'd tried to steal. Today, the Knox estate houses a reform foundation dedicated to exposing medical fraud. The twins, now teenagers, thrive under their father's care, their mother and uncle serving lengthy sentences for crimes ranging from fraud to attempted murder. And in the study, behind the journals, Rim keeps one final paper, his father's warning letter, a reminder that justice, like the truth, may skip a generation but never sleeps. Epilogue. A decade later, the Knox estate stood prouder than ever against the autumn skyline, its colonial architecture restored to its former glory. 10 years had passed since the night of the gala, each one marking another step in cleansing the poison from the Knox legacy. Rem sat in his study, now brightened by large windows he'd installed after removing the old, shadowy corners where secrets once hid. The weathered oak shelves still lined the walls, but they no longer held deceptions, only history and hope. His laptop displayed the latest report from the prison monitoring system. Evangeline's 7th parole request had been denied. Her designer silks had long since been replaced by prison grays, her perfectly manicured world reduced to a 6x8 cell. The psychological evaluation noted her continued refusal to acknowledge her crimes, still insisting she'd been framed. Her attempts to contact the twins through various aliases had finally stopped 3 years ago, after Rim's lawyers threatened additional charges. Declan hadn't fared much better. His charm had worn thin in federal prison, especially after fellow inmates discovered his role in his father's death. Multiple transfers between facilities hadn't improved his situation. His last appeal had been rejected 6 months ago, the judges unanimously agreeing that the evidence of his crimes was overwhelming. Dr. Theodore Blake, the man who'd practiced as Thaddeus Blackwood, had died in prison 2 years into his sentence. His deathbed confession had revealed even more depths to the conspiracy, including details about other families he'd manipulated through falsified medical records. The Knox Foundation's Medical Fraud Investigation Unit had used his testimony to expose similar schemes across the country. Dad. Sebastian's voice pulled Rim from his thoughts. His son stood in the doorway, 18 now, and bearing a striking resemblance to his grandfather. The foundation board is waiting in the conference room. The twins had grown into remarkable young adults. Aurora was finishing her first year at Harvard Law, following in her father's footsteps with a focus on corporate fraud litigation. Sebastian, with his gift for numbers, had already started working part-time at the Foundation's forensic accounting department under Sterling's mentorship. "Tell them I'll be right there." Rem closed the prison report. "How's the new tracking system coming along?" Sebastian grinned. "We've identified 3 more suspicious medical practices using the algorithm. Sterling thinks we can have them shut down by month's end." The Knox Foundation had been transformed over the past decade. What was once a traditional family trust had become the country's leading force in exposing medical fraud and corporate conspiracy. The same detailed documentation that had brought down Evangeline and Declan now served as a training model for forensic investigators. Cordelia had passed away peacefully 2 years ago, but not before seeing her grandchildren flourish and the Knox name restored. Her final years had been spent helping other families affected by similar schemes, turning her pain into purpose. Sterling had retired from the FBI but stayed on as the Foundation's head of investigations. His RICO case against Evangeline and Declan had become required study at Quantico, showcasing how family fraud schemes could be uncovered and prosecuted. The old study vent, the one that had first revealed the conspiracy, had been preserved behind glass, a reminder that truth often came through unexpected channels. Beside it hung Rem's father's portrait, restored to its rightful place of honor. Maria, the housekeeper who had witnessed so much, still ran the estate with quiet efficiency. She'd been instrumental in helping the twins through the transition, providing stability when their world had been upended. Now she served as the estate's unofficial historian, preserving the lessons learned from those dark days. The manila envelope that had started it all, the fake adoption papers, was now part of the Foundation's fraud education program. Law enforcement agencies regularly requested copies for training purposes, learning how to spot similar schemes. Rem's marriage to Elizabeth, a federal prosecutor he'd met during the trials, had added new warmth to the estate. She'd approached the twins with patience and understanding, never trying to replace their mother but offering friendship that gradually blossomed into genuine family bonds. Their 3-year-old daughter, Hope, represented everything the Knox legacy truly stood for: honor, truth, and resilience. The investigation had rippled far beyond the Knox family. Several other prominent families had discovered similar conspiracies in their own ranks, leading to a nationwide crackdown on medical fraud and trust fund schemes. The Knox Foundation provided resources and support for these families, helping them recover both legally and emotionally. Patricia, Evangeline's sister, had eventually come forward with additional evidence about her sister's crimes. She now worked with the Foundation's victim support program, helping other siblings cope with family betrayal. The twins' birth certificates, the real ones, hung in Rem's private office, alongside the DNA test results that had confirmed what he'd known in his heart. They were his children, in every way that mattered. The fertility clinic fraud had been an ironic twist, revealing that Dr. Blake's manipulation had inadvertently ensured the children were biologically Rem's despite the conspiracy. Janet, Rem's longtime assistant, had risen to become the Foundation's chief operating officer. Her quiet efficiency had helped rebuild the organization from the ground up, implementing safeguards to prevent future infiltration attempts. The annual Knox Foundation Gala still took place, but its focus had shifted. Instead of self-congratulatory speeches about legacy, it now honored whistleblowers and investigators who exposed medical fraud. The event had become a symbol of transformation, showing how tragedy could spark positive change. Aurora's research into her grandfather's death had led to the creation of a cold case unit within the Foundation. They specialized in reviewing suspicious accidents involving corporate whistleblowers, ensuring that other families wouldn't have to wait a generation for justice. In the estate's garden, where Evangeline had once hosted her manipulative tea parties, there now stood a memorial, not to the past's darkness, but to the light that exposed it. The plaque bore the words that had become the Foundation's new motto: "Truth endures, justice prevails." The Knox name, once nearly destroyed by treachery, had become synonymous with integrity and perseverance. Law firms sought Knox Foundation certification for their fraud investigations. Medical boards consulted them on licensing issues. Universities invited Rem to speak about corporate ethics and family governance. Behind the study's journals, in a specially designed safe, Rem still kept his father's warning letter. But it was no longer a reminder of betrayal. Instead, it represented the moment when truth began its long journey to the surface. The letter was now accompanied by a decade of thank you notes from families the Foundation had helped, each one a testament to the power of exposing deception. Evangeline and Declan's crimes had earned them more than just prison sentences. Their assets had been seized, their reputations destroyed, their social circles evaporated. Evangeline's prison counselor reported that she spent hours staring at old photos of the twins, finally experiencing the loss she'd planned to inflict on others. Declan had aged rapidly behind bars, his charm useless against the weight of his crimes. The old guard of the Knox Foundation Board had been replaced by experts in fraud detection and victim advocacy. Quarterly meetings now focused on prevention and education rather than mere profit. The trust that Evangeline and Declan had tried to steal had grown into something far more valuable, a force for accountability in a world of complex deceptions. As Rem walked to the conference room, he passed the wall of success stories, photographs, and letters from families the Foundation had helped. Each one represented a conspiracy exposed, a truth uncovered, a legacy preserved. The twins had insisted on creating this display, understanding that their own story was part of a larger narrative of justice and recovery. The Foundation's legal team, led by attorneys who had worked on the original case, had developed protocols for identifying similar schemes. These were now used by law enforcement agencies nationwide, creating a lasting impact far beyond the Knox family's personal tragedy. In the end, the conspiracy that had threatened to destroy the Knox legacy had instead refined it, burning away weakness and leaving behind something stronger. The snakes were gone from the garden, their poison transformed into medicine for others facing similar battles. Today, as Rem prepared to review new cases with the board, he caught his reflection in his father's old desk. The past decade had added silver to his hair and lines to his face, but his eyes held the same determination they'd shown on that revelatory night in the study. The truth had not only survived, it had thrived, growing into a legacy far greater than anyone could have imagined. Justice, like truth, had not only awakened, it had built a home in the Knox estate, its foundations deeper and stronger than any deception could shake. The next generation of Knox leaders would grow up understanding that legacy wasn't about blood or money. It was about the courage to face truth and the strength to protect it. The manila envelope that had started it all was now sealed in museum-grade preservation, a reminder that the smallest discovery could spark the greatest changes. Future generations would learn that the Knox name stood not for wealth or power, but for the unwavering pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. And in the garden where snakes once hid, flowers bloomed year-round, their colors a testament to the beauty that could grow from even the darkest soil, when tended with honor, nurtured by truth, and protected by unwavering justice.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.